Those of you who have been with us reading the Bible plan, you'll know that last year we took on the New Testament, which was superb. And this year we've been in the Old Testament, but not following it chronologically, which has meant we've taken a while to get to Exodus. But we are here. We are in my favorite part of the Bible. I had this conversation with someone this week. I appreciate and I love what Jesus does. I'm not belittling any of that, but I am fascinated by the Exodus story. And I'm incredibly excited that we are now at the point where we're just going to explore it together over the next couple of weeks. The Exodus story is an incredible journey that we see, and we find it begins just before Exodus, and it continues through with Joshua. So as I said, no disrespect to the Psalms that we've journeyed and that we've been taking apart for the last couple of weeks, but I have been waiting on tenterhooks to get into Exodus. So we are here. And before we begin, I just wanted to paint a little picture of the journey that we've been on to get to the point that we are this morning. So we're going to watch a video together that's just going to give us a little bit of a background as to how we've ended up where we are in Exodus this morning. Okay. So here we are. Who would have thought way back when a young boy was given a Technicolor Dreamcoat, he would be the catalyst for what we see in Exodus? Joseph's journey and everything we read there results in a people group becoming so powerful, so big, that the Egyptians and Pharaoh decide to enslave them. And that is where we find ourselves at the beginning of this Exodus account. Moses, saved and cared for by Pharaoh's very own daughter, becomes the central figure in this story. But before we get to that, I want to help us paint a bit of a picture. And I can't be the only person who finds this to be a reality, so I decided this morning we would go with a show of hands, just to make sure people are still awake. The scenario is this. How many of you have ever undertaken a task while someone has been stood there far more qualified than you offering advice, don't put your hands up yet, only for you to ignore all of that advice and do things your own way first? I cannot, okay, that's good, because there was a worry there that I was on my own. There are quite a few things that I'm guilty of in life, I'm aware of that, but this is probably the most consistent one. Laura will vouch for this for you. The number of times where I'll say something, or I'll set up to do something, Laura, how should I do this? And she'll tell me, and often demonstrate. And then I'll tell her I'm going to try it my way, only to then come back and ask her to take over and fix whatever it is that I've probably broken. Another classic, anyone who has tried to park in the church car park will know this. Do you think I can get through that gap? Not a chance. I'll go and get them. I'll try first. And just as I'm about to wedge my car between two other vehicles, I'll ask someone to move a car for me, just to make sure. And then this one, which is quite possibly my favorite, and if you're ever bored on a Saturday afternoon, I advise you to sit in IKEA car park, and you will watch this numerous times. But despite Laura telling me, and a tape measure telling me, I am almost positive that box will fit in our boot. Only for us to get to the car park, and for me to need to make a phone call, not to Laura, because she stood there laughing at me, but to my dad, asking if he fancies a trip to IKEA that afternoon, just to help put a box in his boot. It amazes me how often, despite having someone with wisdom and advice and a willingness to be a support for us, we will choose still to do things our own way, to take on a task before us in our own way. As I said, I am grateful people raised their hands to show that they have been a part of this. Those of you who didn't, I would challenge that when you were a child, someone told you not to do something, and still you decided it was in your best interest to try it your way. Anyone who grew up and there was a candle, I guarantee you at one point or another placed their hand above it, don't touch it, it'll be hot. How close can I go to said candle before I discover it is actually hot? It's ingrained in us as humans to decide that somehow we know best. Irrelevant of whoever is around us and whatever advice is being given to us, we settle on a conclusion that we know best. If you can relate to any of the examples I've given, if you've been sat there considering your own, then this morning you are in very good company, because you sit in the company of Moses. Moses, who does everything we've just talked about. So I'm going to invite Helen to come, and she's going to bring us our first reading this morning. If you have a Bible with you, while she comes forward, please do turn to Exodus 2, and Helen's going to read for us. Thank you, Helen.
One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well.
Thank you, Helen. We have Moses, who shouldn't even be alive at this point, remember? Shouldn't even be alive, and is faced with a conflict, a very difficult moment before him. Because he is living in a protected environment. He's living under the protection of Pharaoh's daughter, incredibly privileged. A situation that he shouldn't be in, a place he shouldn't be, and as we've said, he probably shouldn't even be alive. And so as he sat there, and every day his life would have been that, his people group are suffering. They are enslaved and they are suffering. And so he steps out and he sees this moment play out before him, a moment of crisis, a moment of moral conundrum, because there is a wrong against his people, against an individual, and he has seen it, and he is stirred to act. Moses sees an injustice, he sees something that is not right, and it creates a tension within him, and he is stirred to act. I don't know if you've ever done this, and I've shared this before with you, we read things so often, we become quite familiar with them, we miss actually what is said in the text. So it came as a bit of a shock to me as I spent more and more time in Exodus to realize that my growing up in this passage had always been that Moses killed the gentleman by accident, an escalation of an encounter that happened. But when we read it, looking this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. This was a calculated murder. I'd always assumed it was a mistake, a bit of a stop doing that, a bit of a push, and he fell off for no apparent reason. I've always assumed there was scaffolding, fell off the scaffolding, he died, he panicked, he buried him. No, we realize this is a premeditated murder. Moses is a murderer. He intentionally saw an injustice and decided that he would take things into his own hands and he would kill the Egyptian that had caused the injustice. He chose to act in a way that was contrary to God. That's what we see here. Moses has decided that there is an injustice, and the best way to solve that injustice is to ignore everything he knows of the character of God and go his own way. Do things in his own accord. Creates a tension for us when we read it, though, because Moses murders this man, and we understand that's wrong, and yet we can probably relate to the conundrum that he faced. There was an injustice, and he wanted to do something. For many of us, we feel that tension in our lives today. There is injustice around us, and we want to do something, and sometimes we don't know what to do, and sometimes we overreact, but we get it. We can understand how Moses found himself in this place. These were people he cared for, people he related to, his people. And he saw a moment that stirred an emotion within him. There was a wrong being done, and Moses acted. So many occasions in our lives we see a need and we decide to step in, to act, to do something. The danger with Moses is he steps outside of the character of God to do it. Please hear me as we go through this. This is not a call for us to become inactive in the world around us. That's not what I'm saying. We read this in Proverbs 31. Speak out for those who cannot speak. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. Moses is functioning within an understanding we would now have with the entire text of the way that God would call his people to be. The problem is his response has been to ignore the best advice around him and take things into his own hands. We are called to be active, but we have to be mindful of how we do it. I'm going to invite Tim to come and read another part from our reading for us, but just before he reads it, I want you to consider this mentality of Moses. Moses saw the misery of one of his people in Egypt. We can take that from the text. And decided to reach out his hand to rescue them. That's what we've just read. Moses saw an injustice, he saw misery, and he reached out his hand to act. Tim's going to come and read for us Exodus 3, 1 to 9. Thank you, Tim.
Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them.
Thank you, Tim. You can begin to see the similarities, can't you? Moses and God both see an injustice, a problem, something playing out before them. In the first reading, we have Moses stepping into the situation, taking things into his own hands. And in this second reading, we have that realization of God being stirred equally and now acting. As I spent time in this passage, it became very uncomfortable to read because I realized this episode in Exodus is very similar to our lives. This picture isn't that distant from the way that we choose to do things. I so often will see a problem laid out before me, and rather than trusting God with it, I will take a solution into my own hands. Rather than trusting God with it, I will go about fixing it or maneuvering something around it on my own. It's very much like having an expert stood beside you, and yet still choosing to say, I see what you're saying, God, but I'm going to give it a go my way first. It's knowing God is there, offering to come to you, to be a part of what you're doing, and yet still deciding time and time again, and I'm as guilty as anyone of this, time and time again saying, God, I know what you're saying. In fact, gosh, as I've got older, I've seen the proof of your work in my life, and yet this time, God, maybe I'm just going to try it my way first. I'm going to try it my way, God, because I'm fairly sure deep down that is the right thing to do. Moses looked out and saw an injustice against one of his own people, and he acted. Moses saw the injustice before him, and he decided to act. Ultimately, an act that would force him away from the problem and away from being able to be a part of a solution. His one act drove a distance between him, very real distance between him and the problem, stopping him being able to act. God sees the suffering of a whole people group, not just the one. And he knows he is able to act and to save them. And then God does something that gets me every time that I read the Exodus account. God uses the one man who ruined his opportunity to be a part of change to bring about change. God uses the man whose heart was stirred for an injustice, and yet he chose to step out on his own and do things his own way. That man who now has real life distance between him and the problem of the people, that's who God chooses to use. God brings Moses back into the story in an incredible way. Remember Moses, who killed a man, buried him in the sand, and then ran away when it became apparent he had been found out. Moses, who had been wandering in his own wilderness for these years. Moses, who we read when that encounter with the burning bush happens, is on the far side of the mountain. He is outcast. He is gone. He is out of the game. For all intents and purposes, his life is now mapped out before him. And yet God, in his infinite wisdom, decides to take the one who killed someone and ran away. Let's just take this into account. Moses at this point is not popular on either side of the fence. The Egyptians aren't best pleased with him. He killed one of them. The Israelites aren't best pleased with him because they're now being punished, additionally, for his act. He is not popular on either side of the fence. He's not getting any votes to be the person to be a part of God's plan. And yet God speaks to him through this bush and says, "It is you who is coming along to rescue my people." We could genuinely spend all day unpacking the depth of what we read in Exodus 2 and 3. There is so much happening here. An incredible volume of information is passed to us in these moments, and so many bits of God's character are revealed, and so many bits of the way that we are to respond to him are revealed. But I want to sit in this reality for a moment. This reality that for many of us, we take things into our own hands rather than trusting God with them. The reality that we take things into our own hands rather than trusting God with them. A footnote before we unpack that. This is not a prosperity gospel. Those of you who have work tomorrow, please still go to work tomorrow. It's not trusting God to sign in the morning. It's not a call to sit back and do nothing about the state of the world. God is clearly calling us to be his hands and his feet. It's not a message to say ignore the doctor's advice or any of those things. None of this is on that level. What it is saying is, do you trust God with it? With everything that he's put around you, do you trust him with it? Because Moses saw an injustice and knew that it was wrong, and he decided to act in his own way, going against God's character. The challenge is there for each and every one of us to stop taking things into our own hands and instead come to God and be led by God, allowing him to be in control. As I wrote this, I had a very clear kind of picture in my head of the situation that many of us will find ourselves in. And it's those situations where we are holding on to something so tightly we can see the whites of our knuckles for fear of what will happen if we don't hold on to it. Those things. Do you trust God with those things? I don't know what they are. I don't know what it is for you that you're holding on to, but the question becomes, are you willing to trust God with it, or are you planning to deal with it alone? Because God saw the injustice, he saw the pain, and he heard the cry of his people, and you know what he did? He acted. As I said, there's so much in this passage we're not going to go into, but I think there's a wonderful moment here where we see those moments where no doubt the people, as they cried out, assumed God had forgotten them. This reminds us God heard it. God heard the cries of his people. He acted, not in some lightning strike or heavenly army way, which I'm sure all of us would have loved as a video. Instead, God acted to his freeing of his people from slavery. He acted by freeing his people from slavery, and to do so, he used a broken, fallen murderer who found himself on the far side of the mountain. That's who God uses to free his people from slavery. What is it that you are holding on to so tightly? That maybe this morning God is just challenging you to bring before him, to trust in his hands, knowing that he sees the pain, sees the burden, sees the worry, and is acting. There's also another side to all of this, and it's what I want to look at just as I begin to close. Moses was a prime candidate to disqualify himself from being useful to God. Moses was very low on any of our charts for people at this point that would be useful to God. Murderer, he's run away, he is not popular with either people group. So I wonder how many of us look back on our lives, on the past actions we've made, and disqualify ourselves from being used by God. Even when we've gone into a situation with the best intentions in the world, the outcome has been such pure chaos that we go, you know what, God, you could never use me. You could never use me. Maybe across the board you've decided that, or maybe very specifically in that area where something stirred you to act, to move, to be a part of something, and yet the chaos that came from it has made you assume, I couldn't be used, I couldn't go back there, I have ruined everything. And yet God, through that burning bush encounter that Tim read for us, calls Moses back to action, back into the place that his heart was first stirred. Please remember that. This whole thing plays out from Moses being stirred by something that is wrong. His initial response is understandable. There is a wrong and he wants to do something. God takes him back to the place where he was initially stirred. The difference this time is that God is with him and he is being led by God in his actions. All too often we look at the things we've done and we assume they are the full stop to our story. I don't know if you've ever thought of it like this. I thought of this as I was putting it together. So many parts of my life, I assume, and we talk about it, don't we, like chapters and stuff. We assume that's the full stop. That's the end. That's it done. That action has finished that part of my story. Moses had had his full stop moment as he ran from Egypt. I think we can conclude that's a fair assumption. His full stop moment came as he ran from Egypt. But you have to wonder, don't you, as God appeared in that burning bush, had God seen something in Moses? A drive, a passion to make a difference, a hurting for his people group, a sense of what was right and wrong. And God knew that with him, with God beside him, Moses could make a difference to what he saw before him. In fact, if you've been following our Bible reading plan, you will begin to see the Bible is full of people who have failed on their own and yet succeed with God. So I wonder, for those of you who hold on to things so tightly, the whites of your knuckles show how many of us sit here having written ourselves off. Maybe because of something someone else has said. Maybe someone spoke something over you. Maybe a mistake you've made has been ruling you out. Maybe it's your gender. Maybe you just aren't the right person for God to use. People have told you that all your life. Maybe you've decided that for yourself. As I said, the mistakes you've made, the things you've been through have meant that you couldn't possibly be used by God. The truth is this, as I close, it doesn't matter whose those voices are, be them yours or the voices of others. They are not the voice of God. They are not the voice of God, and we see something extraordinary in this part of the Exodus story. Because Moses, when he did it his way, killed a man and ran away, and in so many senses made the whole thing worse. He made the whole thing worse. But when Moses does the same thing, sees an injustice and is driven to act, when he does it with God, it begins an incredible journey of freedom, a journey that would ultimately lead the people to the promised land. God uses Moses in the most incredible way. It is the same Moses. So often we seem to draw a line in the sand and go, yeah, but that was like old Moses and this is new Moses. That's like a Bible thing. That doesn't happen now. Rubbish. Same Moses, same God. The difference, Moses took it into his own hands and Moses did it with God. That's the difference. Do you trust God with the things in your life? Do you trust God with the things in your life. God took Moses, who messed it all up, and uses him to play a huge part in the rescuing of God's people.